Let me start today's video with a huge thank you to all of you for the immense love and support you all showed recently. Your kind support helped me achieve the 10,000 subscribers milestone, and it is a big thing for me as I have been creating videos for almost 2 years now. It is indeed a great motivator to work harder and bring more exciting content for you. This would have never been possible without you all. In today's Photoshop composition, I will show you how I turned these stock images into a fantasy artwork like this. Throughout the video, I will keep giving you tips on various important topics like composition rules, masking tricky objects, different highlighting techniques, aerial depth, bokeh effects, and much more. I hope you will find this video helpful. And do let me know in the comments if you get to know something new. That way I'll understand that my videos are being helpful to you and will help me create better content in the future. By the way, all the stock images shown here are free and you can get the links from the description section, so feel free to explore if you want to create something along the lines. But before getting started, hold on for a moment. The image you see now is just one part of it, and here goes the full picture. I don't think I need to mention the environmental message that I wanted to convey, but if you're wondering why this image has two compositions, because it is called Two Worlds, and I created this for a contest hosted by my friend Mr. 23. This artwork was for his Do It Better contest for the month of September, where the challenge was to create a two worlds concept using these two images. Valentin, also known as Mr. 23, hosts this contest almost every month, and I would highly encourage you to go and participate because these are really fun. Also, he is an amazing creator and he has many in-depth tutorials on various Photoshop compositions and topics on his YouTube channel. I'm pretty sure you will find them helpful, so don't forget to check his YouTube channel Mr. 23 and his Instagram Mr. 23 Design. Alright then, let's get into our composition and let's create. I started with placing the image of the cave and the hilltop and roughly blended them in. Here I went for the rule of thirds, where I created the bottom world in the lower 2/3 and the upper one on the remaining top 1/3. I occasionally use the free transform warp to mold the landscapes as how I see fit. I also added the image of this cut down forest and roughly patched it in places using a grungy brush and layer mask. I used 3 images of factories for the top scene and wanted to create a gritty, fiery industrial wasteland. This image was placed at the back and I added a quick color cast using a hue saturation adjustment layer as a clipping mask. I checked the colorize checkbox, dragged the hue slider to some blue shades and dropped the saturation a bit as it will be a nighttime scene, and reduced the lightness as well. Further darkened it up using a brightness and contrast adjustment layer. I dropped the second image and went inside the smart object to remove the sky. I used the channel separation method, where I went into the channels tab and checked which channel layer has the most significant contrast, then duplicated it by dragging it and dropping it on the new layer icon and increased the contrast using levels. The idea is to make the sky close to a white color and all that I want to keep close to black color. Then I can easily select the black pixels and add it as a layer mask. For any further fine tunings, I took a manual paint with brush approach. This technique works very well if you have fine details to separate, like these industrial structures or trees, branches, wires, and so on. I added a quick color grading using curves, dropped the top right point of the curve in RGB channel to darken it up, and boosted it in the blue channel to add a nice blue color cast. Also dropped the curves in the red and green channels to intensify the dark blue effect. Then dropped the third image of the factories and used the same channel separation method to select the industrial structures. I went into the channels tab, checked which layer has the greatest contrast between the structures and the sky, duplicated it and intensified the contrast using levels, then corrected anything using a manual approach, then selected the black pixels and used them as a layer mask. I learned this technique from one of the videos by Photoshop wizard Max Asabin, so you can check out his channel for more Photoshop awesomeness. I added a quick dark blue color cast using curves just like before. I added some images of cut down forest and debris and patched them on top of the composition to make it more varied. This smoke will help create a separation between the nearer hilltop and the distant factories and also help add atmospheric perspective and depth. I added more debris to break the monotony and create a feeling of the industrial wasteland on the top. After a rough masking, I used curves to color grade it as well. For the fence, I used the same channel separation method to remove the sky. Let's revise it again. I went into the channels tab and checked that the blue channel layer has the greatest contrast, so duplicated it by dragging it on the new layer icon, boosted the contrast using levels, and manually fine-tuned the wanted areas by painting with black. All that I do not want is there in white, and everything that I want to keep is in black color. Then select the black pixels and use them as a mask. I also use the same curves to color grade. I'm putting the adjustment layers here. You can pause it and check if you want. I mostly dropped the RGB curve from the top right to darken it up and dropped the curves in the red and green channels to create a dark blue color cast. At the same time, lifted the curve on the blue channel for boosting the overall blues. I also added a vibrance adjustment layer and desaturated it a bit since it is a nighttime scene and the colors will look washed out. Next, I added some trees to frame our composition as well as add a desolate feel. I mostly selected the trees using quick selection and used select and mask to refine the edges. In other areas, I fine-tuned the mask by painting manually. After warping and placing the trees according to my liking, I dropped the image of the kids. I again quickly selected them using the subject selection tool and went into the select and mask to refine the edges and refine the hair. I also painted by hand on the layer mask to fine-tune any imperfections. I removed the sunglasses as it did not fit the nighttime scene. Added a kid's backpack from another image. I tried to create something that these kids are going on an adventure through this cave or something like that. I used curves to add the dark blue color cast on the trees and the kids as well. I'm displaying the curve settings I used here, so you can pause and check if you want. Time to create the new world teeming with life. I dropped this image of the forest and this image of the deer. I masked it out using the subject selection tool, and for the tricky parts like the antlers and hooves, I used a manual paint over method. Drop this image of the rusted car and use the same methods for selecting and masking it out. If you have a pen tablet, it is really efficient to mask out tricky areas like these by manually painting with the brush. Without the pen tablet, if you only have a mouse, I think the best bet to use the pen tool and precisely select the edges. I added some more tires and debris to frame our composition and make it look diverse. Started adding some color grading on the forest using curves and color balance. I experimented a bit here, so I'll display the final settings I went with. You can pause and check the settings if you want. I wanted to create a bright green color vibe that gives a sensation of life and light. Next, I started working a bit on the top waistline part. I added some red color casts using curves, added a black layer mask to hide everything, and then paint over the layer mask with white to reveal some glows. I wanted to create a fiery wasteland as opposed to the green full of life composition on the bottom. I occasionally painted on a layer with the screen blending mode and a dark orange color to give hints of fiery glows. I just made sure that the factory layer at the very back looks a bit washed out than the factory images at the very front. This happens due to the atmospheric haze, and it helps make the distant objects look further away and the nearer objects look closer to the viewer. If you want to learn more about the atmospheric perspective and depth, be sure to check my detailed video on that topic. I'm sure you will find it helpful. I'll put the link in the description section. I painted some orange highlights on the structures just to give more definition and make the shapes stand out in the overall dark environment. Then I again came back to work on the bottom forest area. I made the deer glow using a channel mixer, but you can use anything you want. I had no idea what would work best here, and I wanted to retain some 3D form, otherwise it would look very flat. But whatever I did with the channel mixer washed it away anyway, and I will add some form shadows afterwards. I added a quick glow by putting some dabs of grey color with a soft round brush on a blank layer having the screen blending mode. I did paint with a grey color, but the adjustment layers that I added previously are changing it to a nice blue hue. Now it's time to work on the highlights. To speed things up, I added a quick edge highlight on the cave boundary using the layer style's inner shadow technique. Just add a layer styles inner shadow and change the blending mode to linear dodge and select some color in the color of the light. It is not perfect, but it gives a good kickstart for the highlights to fine tune later. If you want to learn more in detail about these highlighting techniques using inner shadow, you can check out my detailed video on that topic. The link should be in the descriptions as well. Now, since there will be different colors of light, I took a different approach for the highlights than usual. I created a blank layer filled with black, then changed the blending mode to linear dodge and painted on it with the color I wanted for the highlights. I switched between blue, teal, green and leaf green to create some variations on the highlight colors. I also played with the blend if section in the underlying layer slider to reveal some underlying details and make the highlights look realistic. From the descriptions below, you can check out my detailed video on highlights using a solid color fill in linear dodge blending mode. You might find it helpful. Well, recently I found out that curves work the best for the highlights, so I will soon make a video on that topic. Be sure to stay tuned. Next, I started painting some highlights on the kids using the same method. I created a blank layer, filled it with black and changed the blending mode to linear dodge, then painted with the correct color of light, choosing between blue and green to paint the highlights. As before, I also played with the blend if section to reveal some darker details from the underlying image, as that makes the highlights look a lot realistic. Once that is done, I painted some shadow with a dark grey color and a soft front brush on a blank layer set to multiply blending mode. The kids are facing the light, so the side facing us should be a lot darker. I added an exposure layer as a clipping mask, moved the sliders to get some darker values, and painted with black on the layer mask in areas where I didn't want the shadow. Did the same thing with the cave ground and the ceiling. Added an exposure layer with dark values as a clipping mask. This time filled the layer mask with black to hide everything and painted with white on areas to reveal the shadows. I focused on darkening up the sides of the rocks facing us as they are opposite to the light. Repeated the same steps as mentioned earlier to darken up the rusty car and paint the highlights. For creating any ambient light on the composition, I generally create a blank layer in soft light blending mode and dab some colors in the correct color of the light. Here you can see me painting with some yellows on the bright spots, whereas brushing with some cool violet, blue, green in the shadowy areas. I started adding some overall color grading to see where it is all going. This is again a matter of personal preference and may vary from person to person, but I will show you what I added. I created a curves and lifted the blacks but darkened the shadows. Went into the blue channel and increased the blues in the highlights, whereas reduced it in the shadows to introduce some yellows. Created another curves adjustment layer and dropped the blues from the highlights to introduce some yellows, but I masked it only for the top composition as it was more towards a warmer tone. I created a brightness and contrast adjustment layer and reduced the contrast but increased the brightness as it was a bit dark. I boosted the vibrance but masked it from the bright spot as it was becoming too saturated on that area. I finally added a selective color adjustment layer and played around a bit, but I was kind of experimenting around, so you might get some better results by some other methods. Time to finish up some unfinished highlights on the trees and other areas. I won't repeat the process as you already know from the previous steps. Towards the finishing steps, I decided to add some smoke as that would help blend the sharp boundary of the cave with the forest inside it and also add a mystical element. Plus, the smoke will act as a screen to make the kids stand out. So, strategically placing various elements in the composition can really do cool stuff. I also added some fog on the cave floor just to boost up the mystical vibe. I decided to add some glowing footsteps of the deer. I used a layer in the screen blending mode and painted with some blue-gray color. The adjustment layers added previously on top of it are changing it to a bright white-blue color. As mentioned earlier, just to make the deer not look flat, I painted some form shadows with some dark blue-gray color. The adjustment layers added on top are again shifting the colors to some bluish tone. Time to spice it all up with some bokeh and particle effects. I dropped a rainbow lens flare, changed the blending mode to screen and warped it into place. Did the same with the second lens flare image. I also used levels to darken up the blacks so that it gets removed as I changed the blending mode to screen. Warped and fitted into place and masked any unwanted areas. Duplicated and used as well as required. I also used the sky image and applied the channel separation method outlined earlier to select the clouds. Then I warped and smudged it to create some dynamic smoke effects. For the sparks, I took a bonfire image, masked as required, desaturated it, changed its blending mode to screen, and applied levels to boost the contrast and get a better blend. Then I used the free transform warp to fit it according to my imagination. Added some sparks on top as well, but added an orange color cast to intensify the fiery industrial wasteland feeling. For the additional lens flare, I took a bokeh image and applied the spin blur from filter, blur, radial blur. I also changed the blending mode to screen and increased the contrast with levels for a better blend. Made multiple copies of the same, rotated and masked as required. Added some standard bokeh on the bottom corners as well. Finally, I added some camera raw filter, which you must have seen me rarely use. I generally keep color grading as the composition progresses, just like a traditional painting. But I use camera raw only if I need to get details in the shadows or for some sharpening. So I did the same thing over here. As the image was pretty dark, I lifted the shadows and the blacks to get some more details in those areas. But at the same time, I reduced the highlights and the whites a bit to help achieve a flat HDR look. And here goes the final result of the two worlds composition. Do let me know in the comments if you got to know something new from this video. And if you found it helpful, please don't forget to like it and share it with your friends. And if you're liking my overall content, please be sure to subscribe to my channel, as that would greatly motivate me to create more videos like this. Well then, I will see you in the next video, and till then, enjoy creating.